Hey guys, and welcome to my review of Okko Chronicles by the Red Joker. This is a 2 to 5 player game, though there is an expansion where you can do solo co-op, so it can be 1 to 4 players as well, if you play in that mode. It's kind of a dungeon crawl, but it's a little different. I'm going to actually go into the kind of high-level details of some of the major game mechanics so I can discuss it with you so that you know what it is I'm talking about during this review. But really, you're just going to go around getting objectives. You'll get some like clue cards and try and accuse the Oni and figure out who the main demon is, and then attack them and kill them and all that good stuff. So let's get into kind of the not nitty gritty, but the high level detail of how to play this game, and then we'll talk about it here again. Alright, so the storage solution in this is actually really good. If we open up the box here, you'll see exactly how I have it stored personally. So you got your rule book and your scenario book for the base game up on top. We have some cards here, and you'll notice this is actually some expansion cards in here as well. This is just some extra cards. This is what the dice came in, that bag, but I'll show you what I did with the dice. Here is a errata, more on that later, but there's just some FAQ and some changes there. But figured, print it out, put it in there. We got the corruption track here. And then we have all the miniatures still in their tray, which is great for painting because you can just store it in there. Alright, so here are the dice. As I said, the dice can have their own little spot here. This was empty at the beginning because underneath they were in here. But here is a great place for the tokens. You just put them in, like a quart-sized bag like that, and you have pretty much every token in the game. None of the expansions are punched out in here, but I bet I could probably fit those in too. So put this back. So you can tell it kind of fits pretty nicely, actually. Then here we have kind of all the cards here. And the equipment deck here. If I add all the equipment cards, they get a little big. It's just a little too high and it gets a little messy. It's not terrible, and I think it's still pretty safe. But, it is what it is. Like, I've already had to separate these out, so I might have to get a little bag to put those in, but I could put that on the top, same with that other one. So I got all these cards here, all the wound cards, event cards, the action cards, and then, of course, your little story points there. So that's the storage. Actually really, really good. Nice and sturdy tray here. Very happy with the tray. Like, this is super, super sturdy. Everything looks like it fits here. I'm going to assume that this might fit some sleeves. It really depends. You can see there's a little bit of wiggle room in there. I haven't sleeved them yet, so I couldn't comment on that perfectly, but it might. Equipment, again, it might. I would worry about the side more than the top. So it just kind of depends on the sleeves you're using, probably. Anyway, that's the storage. I'm able to put pretty much everything in here except the miniatures from the expansions and some expansion-specific things. Okay, so what you see before you is kind of the typical layout of a game in Okko Chronicles. This has a bit of everything going on here. It's got, all these miniatures on here and some tokens that represent different things and doors and chests and whatnot. And then, you got all your character stuff here, and you got the Oni player here or over there or something like that. And you got some tokens and cards and dice and all that. I'm going to dive into some of the basics of this, but this is not going to be a thorough end-to-end walkthrough of the game. This is just to give you an idea of what this game plays like, so then when I talk about it, you know what it is I'm talking about. Okay, let's take a typical look at a character. In this case, Setsuka here. She's got no left hand, which, is whatever. A right hand, clothing, supplies, a follower, and then a special ability and some starting equipment. She also has her movement ability, her might, or how many die she does when she attacks. Her automatic defense, that's what you have to get more hits than to hurt her. And then you have her guild test score, which is a 2 with 3 stamina, which just means how many essentially wounds she can receive before she receives a wound card. Now, one of her special ability here is to start with a follower, which you put down here, and they have their own abilities, and then also an amount of actions that you can do. This is similar to the Oni player. And then, of course, sometimes a special action, in this case, a unique action that they can only do once, some powerful move, and then their stamina over here. You'll also notice that she has a personal mission. Each character has, they kind of roll die here, and they, decide which which personal mission is based off that. And this is just something that you can get more points for at the end of the scenario or campaign that you're playing to kind of score higher. It's just something else to kind of work towards. You'll notice many things change the item-wise. So in the katana, she gets 1 extra might, so she will roll 4 black die instead of just 3. But notice that only a samurai and a ronin can use the katana. So Noshin cannot. If you see Noshin here, he cannot because he is a Mahatsukai, whatever that is. Okay, so we have her here, and she's got kind of all these different things. Now, what you'll end up with is a set of action cards. Now, these are all the action cards you will have. So, eventually, you're going to use them all, and then you'll have to bring them back into your hand and reshuffle. Now, you can do 2 things with this. For instance, here you can place it to the right, and then it will enhance these. And in this one, she gets 1 more movement, but 1 less die and attack, and +2 defense. She will not get this ability down here because you played it to the right. If you wanted to use the charge ability, you would place it to the left of her character card. Now you can do both. So if you wanted her to charge with more attack, you could do that. You would do this and she can charge, but she will move a little bit less, which is kind of silly, but just go with it. And she gets 2 more die and is more defensive. But maybe you wanted to use this loyal followers because you're going to lose that until you get it back, and you can't get it back until you use all your cards. Another thing to keep in mind when using these cards is your weakness. Every hero has a weakness. One of the good things is you can remove a number of damage tokens from your character card equal to your stamina. So if she had 3 wounds on here, she can remove them by placing her weakness. It will always go on the left, so she cannot use any of her special abilities. Now, the problem is that this will either give her a debuff or it'll give the entire team a debuff. And when that happens, it can be really bad if every character does it. So you have to work together to decide when is best to play this weakness card. Now, why would you want to play it? Well, first of all, you have to get your cards back because you have to play all of your cards before you can get them back. So it has to be played at some point or you run out of actions, obviously. Additionally, it'll remove the wound tokens. So if she had 3 wound tokens, 1, 2, 3, now she might want to play this card because if she didn't, or let's say 2 or whatever, right, she would get a wound card. And wound cards are not good. Wound cards are bad. This one, again, you have to play it to the left or to the right. But you'll notice here you must reduce your attack roll result by 2 hits, and you're also going to get -1 regardless of what you do here. You're in bad shape, and this does not go away. If you receive 3 of these in your hand, you are dead, permanently dead, removed from the game. You are not playing this game any longer. Go home, make somebody a sandwich. I don't know what you do when you leave the table. But either way, it's bad. Don't do it. Now, if you actually had played this and you had 3 or 2 here, that's not 3 in your hand. So you're good for a little while. But the moment you draw this back, you're in bad shape. So you definitely want to get rid of those. That's kind of the basics of playing a character. You get 3 actions, so you can move and attack and then attack again, or you can interact with something, move and attack, or you can move 3 times, or you can attack 3 times. It's pretty loose. The main thing is doing this, where you decide which ones you want to do and which ones you don't. Whether you want to do decisive action, but then you've lost the ability to upgrade your gil, or maybe you wanted just more defense and attack, but then you lost your loyal followers. So deciding between that is kind of the main meat and potatoes of the hero side. Now let's go over to the Oni side, and I'll explain that a little bit. Okay, here we are on the Oni side of things, and as you can tell, it's a little different, at least with the corruption track, which is kind of a big point here that I really want to explain well. So you'll notice there's kind of a round counter, and you can track what round it is, and that really matters because what you line up with is what you can do. So here in round 1, the only thing you can do is this one. So you place one of your symbols, you put it right there, the matching symbol, and now the Mortal Thralls. During the strategy phase, I can discard 2 event cards to spawn 4 identical Mortal Thralls. What are event cards? Event cards are these. You'll have stuff looking kind of like this that you can kind of deal with. And again, you'll notice it's very similar to the heroes where you have kind of the increases here or the special ability here plays a little bit different. I'll get with that after the corruption tile or the corruption track here. So as it goes along, you can place these corruption tokens on the map. I'll explain that during kind of the map explanation there. And then, of course, you would also get this one where you can spawn supernatural creatures. Round 3, I can move a corruption tile, and then I get to pick one. So now I can either give all my mortal thralls +1 attack die or +1 automatic defense. And I have to decide, I can only do one. Round 5, I'd be able to pick whether they move more, whether they have another action, or something special like remove 1 die from all attacks targeting them, or follow a successful attack. They may move to an adjacent space afterwards, so they can attack and move in one go there, so it just takes 1 action, which is kind of nice. There's a lot of different things going on here. Once you get round 4, then you get to pick for your supernatural creatures and their buffs, so you're going to get stronger and stronger as the turns go around. You'll also get a red tile here. Again, I'll explain this kind of in the objective overview part, but that means something at the end of round 4 as well. Moving on from that, we have the tiles. Now you'll notice there are 2 different backgrounds. There's gray and black. Gray are your mortal thralls, black are your supernatural creatures. The differences, obviously, besides the fact that they're different colors, well, duh. And they get different buffs, is that at the beginning, before the alarm is raised, these guys, you can't move as much. They have to be on a corruption tile where you place this token. Whereas the supernatural creatures can just move around. They're already evil. You can do whatever you want with them. Now, again, just like the heroes, you're going to be placing things to the right here to buff them up as you see fit. And then they go away each round and whatever, right? The difference is that if you want to place one of these, you don't place it on the left of a specific one. Whenever you activate a card, which you do with your little activation token, whenever you do that, you can play one of these and it'll tell you what you can do. You can remove 1 damage token from the character card or lieutenant of your choice. Draw 2 event cards, play 1 immediately and keep the other. Your agent's attacks, if successful, target are poisoned. I mean, there's different things you can do, and you can play those. You get 2 of these every round. You also get 1 every time you cannot activate somebody. For instance, if you had 1, maybe you just had these Yuri out, or maybe the Yuri and the Shigaru out, and that's the only 2, and you're going against 3 heroes. Well, you can only activate them once, so 1 character would go, and then you would go. Another character would go, and then you would go. Another character would go, and you have nobody to activate. You would draw an event tile for that. Additionally, they all have kind of these special abilities, but other than that, they're about the same. Again, like followers, they're going to have actions. You can increase them, obviously, but that's kind of the gist of the Oni side. Very similar, a little different. Okay, now before I talk about combat and interaction and all those kind of actions you can do as a hero, I just want to reiterate that one hero does all of their actions, and when they are done, if they have a follower, their follower makes the actions, then that hero's turn is over, and then the Oni player can play according to, the rules of the corruption and all that. Now, the order they go in is actually based off of these initiative cards, and so you'll place them down and it's hidden from the Oni, and you'll flip them 1 over, so Okko will go, then the Oni player, 1 of their agent tiles, then Notion would go, and then an Oni and 1 of its agent's tiles, and then Setsuko would go after that. So they're not all going to go at the same time. However, I am going to just kind of explain everything all at once. So this is not a typical game round. It's just kind of explaining your various actions you can do. So, first of all, for movement's kind of interesting here. You'll see these white lines, and any white line, even the ones you add like doors, allow you to move between spaces. So for instance, to get here, you could either go 1, 2, or you could go 1, 2. Walls and these white lines are what denote an area. So this is an area. This long corridor is an area. This room is an area. That big room over there is an area. This little tiny corner thing is an area because of the lines here and the walls. Okay, so that's kind of the areas. And then within that, you're going to see all these blue dots. These are different spots you can be on the area itself. There's also some special ones like here. Whenever the Oni player wants to spawn in more guys, he can do so on those tiles only. Now, when you are moving, you can either move between areas, your movements. So if Okko has 2, he would be able to move 1 or 2, assuming this guy's not here, or he can move with an action just to a different spot. And this is useful if you're like far away from somebody, you want to attack him, he can't from here, he would have to do an action to move to attack him. Now, if you have an enemy in the area, then you can escape. You can't be blocked in that sense. You can be blocked by too many spots taken up. But your actions end the moment you land on a space with an enemy, and then you have to spend an action to go to an adjacent. So even though he has a movement of 2, he could only go either here or here. When you go into an area, you get to pick which spot you go into, but he can only go to an adjacent one. So anywhere here would work too, or anywhere here would work, because these 3 areas are adjacent because they share a white line. So that's kind of the basics of movement and kind of how you would move. Now, let's switch gears because I want to do combat last here, and I want to talk about interacting here. So you'll see here, he has a test. Let's say Notion wants to unlock this chest. Well, this is a test of 2, and it'll be against the speed because of the color. If this had been yellow, like this token here, then it would be a gill test. You could also have maybe a might test or something like that. Anyway, he'll have to roll 2 of the test die and get less than his value in his speed, which is 2. So he would roll that, and he got 2, which is equal to or less than, he would have been able to open it. If he had gotten worse, I'm an amazing roller, so I'm not going to get worse. That's actually untrue. Anyway, then he would have wasted that action. He could try again. However, you'll actually get this really nice -1 on some of the tests. Some of the tests don't, but in this one, it becomes easier the more you try. Now, this denotes how many cards he'll draw. And then you flip it over, and it shows you how many you get to keep. So he's going to draw 3 and keep 1. So you draw 1, 2, 3, and he got a light armor, he got a scroll, ball of fire, and he got a Wakashi or whatever. And he can pick and choose what he picks and doesn't, and then discards the other 2. For combat is, again, essentially character card versus character card here. So you'll notice here that unbuffed, so let's assume he's not buffed, he has a defense of 5. So Okko here will have to do 5 or better. Now, if he's unbuffed here, he will have 3. So he'll be rolling 3 black die. So you get your black die, you roll them, and he got 2, 3, 4. That's less than 5. He didn't get a hit. Now, let's say he got a key. So there's this key symbol, and this is essentially the wild symbol here. It's exploding dice, so it counts as a hit. So it'll be a hit, and then he gets to roll it again. So, then maybe he got 2 more. So this one die gave him 3, the key plus the 2. Sometimes you'll get action die added to them. That's these red die. They are better than the black die, so they're always really good to get. And of course, you can go more than the default 5. That's one of my minor complaints, is that there aren't more dice added. You can easily get above 5 base. So for instance, I don't think I have one with me, but anyway, you can increase the to where he's rolling 7 black die, and obviously you only have 5, so you have to re-roll them and kind of count them, or purchase the add-on for extra dice. Highly recommended for that. All right, so that's kind of the basics of combat. You either get it or you don't. Anything above it, you're just testing not how much damage you're doing, but instead testing if you hit or not. If it was success, you get 1 wound. Most of the enemies here only have 1 wound, or 1 stamina, and so he would be removed from the game. But that's the basics of combat, and pretty much all you're going to be doing is rolling that against the automatic defense. There's no defense roll or anything like that here. Alright, let's start things out with this rulebook. This rulebook reads really well, and it's actually kind of enjoyable to read. There's no weird wordings or anything here. The translation seems to be really good from French, and I must say, reading it, front to back, it's pretty good. It flows kind of odd. I mean, playing the game is the last 3 pages, and then everything else, I guess you weren't playing the game. There's some oddities. But otherwise, the translation's really good. There's a lot of call-outs and examples and tells you what you're doing. And it has a great a great component list. This is one of my favorite, actually. I love seeing the images and then the title of it. So when you say grab this card, I know you mean this card and not this card, because I know the difference because you showed me the component list. I also have like a component rundown list so you can make sure you got everything, which is really good there. What's not so good is there's not a table of contents and there's not an index. There's no way to like look something up. If you need to look up followers, you're just leafing through this. If you need to look up event cards, you're just leafing through this. If you need to look up combat, again, you're just leafing through this. Not even a table of contents. That's actually a first for me. I don't think I've ever had a game that didn't do the basics of, I mean, I guess there's page numbers at least. Maybe you could write your own notes. I don't know. It's unfortunate. Now there is a PDF, so you can always search through it that way, which is kind of nice. But honestly, without an index and without a table of contents, this rule book is a loser, in my book. However, they will be redoing this. They will be adding a lot of stuff because all of this. So, this is all of the many changes and updates and frequently asked questions that people have noticed when playing this. And as you can see, there's quite a lot, especially when it comes to listing the tiles out and some of that setup stuff. You'll remember in my Joan of Arc review, I mentioned the same issue where the setup rules obviously listed it wrong or showed it wrong. And like there's one, even the second one actually, the second scenario has you use both sides of the same tile, which is impossible unless you live in some alternate dimension. I do not, and therefore it was a bummer. However, they will be adding that kind of stuff in. They have reassured me personally that there will be an index, so there you go. That's always good. But, you know, it reads well, it's translated well, and the gameplay itself makes sense, which is nice. It's fairly intuitive, especially some of the notes like on the corruption track. It pretty much explains itself. If they had never shown what I do there, it's pretty obvious what happens there. So stuff like that's good. But overall, the rule book for the first edition, not the second edition of this from the second Kickstarter, but the first one is kind of a clunker. Alright, so that's probably going to be your second experience with the game as a rulebook. Your first is just opening it up and seeing the component quality. And I must say, they did great. I have already unboxed it in my typical OCD detail kind of look. Link in the description below to that, so you can actually see up close, you know, how good Okko looks or how good some of these demons look. But they're great. They're really, really good. And it's not just that. The cardboard tokens are good. The art on the tiles are fantastic. As you can see, there's very, very, very little kind of bowing on these tiles. I can kind of press it on the middle. Maybe they're fine. They're great. Nice and flat. Everything punched out well. There's tons of tokens and they all did great. The cards are kind of my only issue, is that they're a little on the skinny side. So sleeving them would probably be recommended. However, you're not shuffling a whole lot of them. You don't shuffle your action cards. You don't shuffle your wound cards. You don't shuffle any of that. You can shuffle the equipment deck and, you know, the event deck after you put stuff back in, probably stuff like that. But in general, there's not a lot of shuffling here, which is good and a little bit more forgiving. And then also on these hero cards, you can see there's a little bit of bend there. Again, just because they're so skinny. These are probably the worst culprits because you're placing stuff on them and you're hand holding these a lot more than a lot of the other cards. So a little bit skinny on that, but the dice are good. I like the dice. The cardboard's great. Miniatures are fantastic. Really excited to paint these. They got a good level of detail. There's not too much. There's not too little, which I always appreciate. And the sculpt design is great. So component wise, great stuff. Oh, and the plastic tray in here, super thick, super nice. I love it. Now, the third takeaway you're probably going to get from this game is the combat. In most games where there's fighting, we care about the combat. Is the combat good? I would be remiss not to mention the combat in a review, obviously. And I must say, I really like the dice system here. I love exploding dice. Exploding dice are always exciting, especially when you know you have to get, because there's pros and cons here. So everybody has a fixed defense, so there's no defensive roll. And that means you know the exact number you need to get. So if you need 5 and you have 4 and you rolled a key, so you're rolling that last die and you know if you get it, then you get to do the damage, and that might be the end damage that kills the guy, and you roll it and you can all shout yay and, or do a little dance or whatever. But it's really, really nice. I love the exploding dice, and I love rolling a lot of dice, and you can pump up to where you're rolling 8, 9 dice, which is very satisfying. I prefer a defense roll, not just because I find that the ramp up can be even more, because you still kind of know how much you need to do damage wise, especially if you can build that into the system. That's great. But then when you have the defense and then it's, oh, can I get it? No, I didn't. And then everybody cheers. It kind of delays it and builds that tension up a bit more, which I prefer. However, this is still fine. The combat's great, and I really, really enjoyed it. I actually had pretty good dice luck, maybe that's why. But no, the dice are good. They seem well balanced. I love the exploding die. It doesn't happen too much, but it can happen enough, especially if you string them. When you get that, then you're doing really good, and that's really enjoyable. Now, the card mechanic here, the basic action of placing your cards down and doing the special moves and deciding what to do, that's fun too, for both the Oni and the heroes. It's the fundamental difference, I feel, of this game versus its brethren in the game market. You're not going to find another dungeon crawler kind of like this, where you have this card mechanic where you're kind of handling a hand a lot, which is a poor wording here. But what I mean is you're dealing with what cards are in your hand and what you want to be left with, what you want to play this time, and kind of pre-planning everything, because you're planning the initiative and what order everything goes in, because you're planning all that kind of stuff. You need to know, okay, if Okko's going to go and try and, interrogate this person, then I'm definitely going to want to put this card down. But then I know Notion over here, he needs to play his weakness because he has some wounds, and he also needs to get his hand back. And so he needs to do the weakness, which really just leaves everything up to Satsuka to do all the damage. And so you're going to want to pump her up with damage and defense and make sure her follower is doing stuff. And all of that kind of strategy is built into really the cards, plus the miniatures position, plus equipment and stuff like that. And I really enjoy when cards interact with miniatures in a way that kind of meshes them together, where it's not just a miniatures game where you're just moving your miniature and then rolling dice. It's not just a game where you're playing cards and playing pretend that something happened. You get to do both. You get to play the card, you get to do the move, you get to roll the dice, you get to see what happened. And that kind of cyclical nature there is really, really good and really enjoyable, and really sets us apart from most other games. So if you like dungeon crawlers, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll like this. Or if you like kind of more Ameritrash games, it doesn't mean you'll like this because of the card system and how unique it is. However, if you're looking for something different and then the rest, then all those other 7 dungeon crawler 1 versus many or co-op games that are on your shelf right now, Okko Chronicles is certainly different. Now, I kind of talked about how Notion would do something, and Satsuka would do something, and Okko would do something. And part of that is because they all actually act fairly differently. I mean, Satsuka literally is missing an arm, and so she can't hold 2-handed weapons. She doesn't have a one-handed weapon, but she can't dual-wield a one-handed weapon, but she starts with a follower, and their stats are different, and their action decks are different too. And so some of them might be able to do more damage, but maybe they can't be as defensive. Or Notion over here starts with a scroll, and so you can do kind of more magic-y kind of stuff with those, or you can like teleport or shoot a fireball or that kind of stuff. He's also really good at doing the tests. And then some people might be slower, some people might be able to jump over other people and kind of do this kind of crazy thing where you jump behind and past people, and they act differently enough to where you can kind of have a favorite, or they interact together. In fact, some of your action cards actually interact with another character, so that if you play them together or if you have them together, that they work good. Satsuka may be buffing other people, but she might get a special bonus if she's with Okko in the same area, vice versa. All that's really, really good, and I enjoy the fact that characters are different. So if you're looking for like expansions, or like, oh, I want to try this character, it'll play different, or it'll add some variety to the game, which is always good. Now, all that being said, one of the issues I have with the base game is that these action cards that you have are what you have for the entire game. There is nothing changing these. You will have the exact same moves over and over and over again. Granted, there's, a good 10 moves here, and they all double up. So there's really like 20 options, plus all the combinations you could do, plus wounds, and when you play your weakness, and your equipment. And I'm not saying there's not variety, but character progression is really in the equipment and not in the action cards. Now, there is an expansion that allows you to be able to upgrade a card and pick a new card and kind of specialize that way. And that's fantastic. It was actually I didn't know about the expansion, and it was a note I took, like, after I played 3 games of this. I went and I wrote a note about how, I just wish characters could expand and kind of evolve over the course of the game, because the campaign can progress more, and more on that later, but your characters kind of don't, besides their equipment and, followers or something like that. The expansion does add that, but base game, so for this review on the base game, just the base game components and all that, this can get kind of old. Luckily, you can swap heroes and stuff like that, but you're just going to see these cards over and over and over and over again. Now, again, I talked about how you could divvy up what people are doing on an individual turn, but that kind of goes into an overall strategy, because not only do you have really cool mechanisms in the game where some of them you're doing this whole clue deck thing, where you have your clue deck and you're trying to figure out who the Oni is and who they're impersonating, which is great and a really cool idea, but not all of the scenarios do that. And so a lot of them, you're just doing typical board game objective stuff. The one I have set up here you're not trying to accuse an Oni or anything like that. You're trying to infiltrate this thing and then get this objective token here and then break out the ambassador who's like locked up here. And so there's much more board gamey stuff that I really appreciate, that you can kind of do both if you like one more than the other, or it just changes things up a little bit. So you're not always trying to do that, but there are other times where you're just doing a specific stuff to this scenario, and the scenario will have its own specific rules to accommodate that, which is really nice and adds to the variety. Now, additionally, you'll also have your, single mission cards here. So you're going to be trying to do this too. And it's just enticing enough. You're just getting a point on your side, though. If you have 3 people, that's 3 points, which can almost negate a loss of a whole, scenario campaign-wise, which is good. But maybe you wouldn't always attack everybody and you just go for the objective, but your personal mission is to kill 5 people or, knock them out or whatever. And so maybe you're going to actually go a little bit slower and try and do that. And so there's that risk versus reward thing that you're going for. Do you just beeline into the objective and just get the scenario over with, or do you try and get your personal objectives too? Additionally, you'll get, loot, and you got to decide, okay, do we just run with the item once we get it, or do we try and loot everything and get all the equipment so we're better prepared next time? There's that kind of push-pull mechanism on risk versus reward that is really well done in this game. Now, speaking of missions and scenarios and all that, the campaign mode here is really, really good. It gets better with that expansion I told you about, where you kind of evolve and the Oni grows and becomes stronger as well over the course of the long term, not just the short term. But the campaign's nice because it's branching, and so you're kind of going through, and even if you lose, if we played this game and the heroes lost, they would play a different Act 3. So it's typically 3 acts, no matter what. But Act 2 and Act 3, there are different options depending on whether you won or lost the previous scenario. Which, again, is kind of cool. It kind of personalizes the story. It makes sense a lot more. If somebody gets away, they get away. If they died, they died. And I really like that sort of branching campaign. It means that you can play it multiple times, and it just is a little bit more RPG, which I always appreciate. Now, the only other thing I want to add before I go into kind of summarizing what I feel about this game and kind of my final rating on it is that if you were to play solo, because there is going to be a solo mode coming up, technically you can play it solo. Technically you can play a 2-player where one player plays essentially a solo portion and the other player just handles the Oni stuff, which is pretty close to the solo mode anyway. It can get a bit much. And the reason is because when you're controlling multiple heroes, I have 10 cards here, and 10 cards here, and 10 cards here, plus their equipment and their personal missions and status ailments they might have. Maybe she's amputated. Again, that sucks. or whatever, you know, maybe maybe Notion's bleeding, and so I have to do that. So there's just a lot. Just the raw card number is a bit much. When you're going through 30 or 40 cards trying to decide which 2 to play to do the different objectives, and you have 3 different personal missions or 4 different personal missions, and so you're trying to do that. I'm not saying you can't do it, because you can. It can just be a little overwhelming at first. Once you start getting your action decks lower, it becomes a little bit easier, and you kind of get in the swing of things. And obviously you can, but it's a little bit heftier in the upkeep than I would prefer, though I'm not much of a solo player anyway, so take that with a grain of salt. Just something I thought I should note. Okay, so what do I think of Okko Chronicles by the Red Joker? You know what? It's kind of interesting. So it plays so different that even if you are a fan of dungeon crawlers, you're not guaranteed to like this. However, if you're not a fan of dungeon crawlers, you might like this one. It plays differently enough to where I kind of view it as a B game. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of games that we will play through over and over and over again, especially these dungeon crawler 1 versus mini games. We play a ton of these. I mean, ever since I got Descent 2nd edition, that's been our main genre, and so we played a lot. And every now and then you get kind of tired of it. And because this plays different, it's a good sub-in for that, which is fantastic. Playtime's pretty good. It's pretty average. You can get kind of short. It can get kind of long. It depends on, are you trying to loot everything? Are you trying to do all your personal missions? Or just beelining it? Some just inherently take longer, like the accusation ones tend to. But in general, it's a very solid game that's a lot of fun when you're sitting down and playing it, messing with the cards and the miniatures and the die rolling and the status and it's kind of RPG elements there. It scratches that itch of your move and attack and your 3 actions and your typical dungeon crawler thing with just that added level of detail with the cards. It's really nice. That kind of spice it up a bit. So if you ever feel like you're in a rut or you're just ready for something new, then Okko Chronicles is actually a really good choice for that. Now, is it the right choice for you? That depends. If you're not a fan of cards, probably not. This is a dungeon crawler where the cards matter. If you're not a fan of dice, probably not, because it's going to have dice. It has both of them. If you're a fan of dice and you're a fan of cards, this isn't a bad one to get. Great detail, great production quality. It's certainly different enough to where I think it has earned a spot on my shelf, and I'm looking forward to getting the rest of it on the Kickstarter, which is live right now if you're watching this as I post it, so link in the description below for that. If it's not live, it's probably during late pledge. If it's not, then, I don't know, maybe you can find it online somewhere in your friendly local gaming store. I don't know. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. I always appreciate it. As always, huge shout out to my patrons. Without them, I couldn't have done a lot of this. It wouldn't be the production quality it is. This camera I'm filming it on is thanks to them, so thank them for this video, not just me. They'll thank me too. If you do want to thank me, comment below. You can also like and subscribe. Of course, I'll be doing plenty more of this. Myth Battles Pantheon's coming soon. There's a lot of games coming soon. Zombicide Invader, Death May Die. There's so much coming. It's going to be pretty crazy here for a while. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.